The hull floated above a glowing crater, its edges shimmering with liquid light, and the hum of energy vibrated through the air. Every step made a ripple in the metallic floor. The crowd of aliens gathered in strange patterns, like swarms of glowing insects. Their voices rose and fell in tones that twisted around the senses. The feeble warhorse trembled on the levitating platform, its coat dull and patched with scars from battles long past. Its hooves scraped against the smooth surface, and tiny sparks flew into the air, each spark fading into the glow of the hull above. The crater light refracted off the domed ceiling, casting patterns that danced across the walls like moving paintings. That horse's breath came in shallow clouds, and its eyes flickered nervously at the beings watching him. He could sense their judgment, their scrutiny, piercing him deeper than any blade or whip. He shifted from hoof to hoof, trying to find a stance that would make him seem worthy, but every movement seemed to draw more laughter from the aliens, whose features were sharp and angular, some with eyes that spiraled in unnatural patterns and limbs that bent in ways that human mind could not understand. They whispered and pointed. Small objects floating near them blinked with light, recording every second as if the auction itself were a living entity. The auctioneer hovered above the horse on a small platform, his metallic robe gleaming with a sheen that reflected every alien gaze. He extended an arm, and his fingers shimmered in the air, manipulating holograms that displayed the horse's history, its victories, its failures, and every scar etched into his body in bright letters. The words feeble, fragile, worthless glowed above the horse, and the crowd murmured in agreement, as if confirming a truth that hurt more than any wound. The horse lowered his head and shivered again, the vibration of the floor running through his legs. The humans in the hole were rare, and the few that appeared seemed small and fragile compared to the towering aliens whose voices could crack stone. The horse felt the weight of every pair of eyes on him, his heart thumping faster and faster like a drum, signaling defeat or perhaps an opportunity he could not yet see. The wind from the crater below whipped through the hall, carrying scents of sulfur and ozone, mixing with the faint smell of old blood and dusty lights above shifted, casting long shadows across his legs, and each shadow seemed to stretch and twist, mocking him. The aliens leaned closer, their long fingers stroking invisible lines in the air, calculating the cost, the risk, the potential of each being present. None of them paused to notice the trembling of the horse's ears, flicked back at every whisper, every laugh. He could feel himself shrinking inside his own skin, wishing somehow he could disappear, vanish from the floating hall. And yet part of him held on, part of him refused to break under their gaze. He lifted his head briefly and stared at the nearest alien, a tall one with a triangular face and eyes that glimmered like black gems, and for a moment he felt a spark of defiance, a small flame in his chest that said perhaps this was not the end, perhaps something else was coming, something unexpected, something that might change everything if only he could survive the next moments. The auctioneer raised his arms higher, and a new wave of holograms sprang up, showing weapons that the horse had once carried, armor he had once worn, and victories he had once claimed. Yet the crowd whispered again, dismissing it all as irrelevant. The horse flinched and lowered his eyes to the floor of the platform, wishing somehow that he could prove them wrong, but unsure if he had the strength to do it. Along the aliens leaned back in their floating seats and whispered among themselves, their voices a mix of clicks and hums that reverberated through the hall, each sound sharp and precise. The feeble horse shifted uneasily on the platform, his muscles tense, his eyes darting from one alien to another as if searching for a sign of mercy or interest, but there was none. The tallest of the aliens leaned forward, its limbs bending at impossible angles, and its voice cut through the hum like a blade. It spoke words the horse did not understand, yet he could feel their weight pressing down on him, their meaning clear, useless, weak, inadequate. The murmurs spread through the crowd, each alien adding a note of scorn, a sigh of dismissal, a shake of the head as if confirming some universal truth. The horse lowered his head, his mane brushing against his shoulders, and he shivered, feeling the heat of judgment and the cold of indifference roll over him like a storm. He pawed at the platform lightly, hoping to catch something that might redeem him, anything that might make them see value. But the crowd only laughed, a ripple of harsh sound that seemed to pierce his very bones. The auctioneer hovered above, adjusting lights and holograms, projecting images of might have been battles, victories lost and failures suffered. The horse recoiled at some of the images flashing across the platform, reminding him of scars both visible and hidden, and yet no alien leaned closer, no hand extended in curiosity or wonder. Each gesture was a calculation, a measure of risk. The whispers grew louder and some of the smaller aliens floated closer, pointing at the horse, tapping strange devices that blinked, with light indicating assessment after assessment. He was too slow, too fragile to... Broken. The horse shook his head and neighed softly, but it was drowned in a chorus of derision. His legs trembled under the weight of countless eyes, every pair of orbs analyzing every twitch, every shiver, every heartbeat. He tried to straighten his back, lift his head higher, show strength that was no longer there in his body, but perhaps still alive in spirit. And yet, the alien voices did not pause. They circled him like predators circling prey, measuring weakness and opportunity. The air shimmered with tension, electricity, and alien energy sparking along the edges of the platform. His breath came in ragged gusts, clouds of vapor curling in the cold hall. The shadows from the floating lights stretched over his flanks, twisting like dark vines as if mocking him. Every glance from the aliens burned into his mind. Every whisper repeated endlessly in his thoughts until he felt hollow, empty, a shell of the warrior who had once been. Yet deep inside, some ember of pride remained, small and fragile, flickering against the tide of scorn. The horse poured again, his eyes flicking to the ceiling, catching a glimpse of the glowing dome above. And for a fleeting moment he imagined freedom. The auctioneer raised his arms, signaling another round of scrutiny. The aliens leaned forward, more calculating, blinking devices, scanning muscles, bones, heartbeats, and every scar history etched into flesh. They murmured and clicked and shook their heads, in unison, every sound a verdict, every motion a sentence. The horse lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of their dismissal like chains around his legs and neck, and he trembled, wondering if any being anywhere would ever see the strength hidden beneath his battered frame. The doors to the hall slid open with a soft hiss, and a shaft of sunlight cut through the glowing air. The feeble warhorse lifted his head, startled by the sudden brightness, his ears flicking toward the sound of footsteps, human footsteps, small, light and steady in a sea of alien presence. The girl stepped forward, her cloak brushing against the floor dusted with faint stardust, and her eyes wide and curious, scanning the floating crowd before settling on him. The horse felt a strange warmth ripple through his chest, something unfamiliar and soothing in the midst of so much judgment. He shifted slightly, leaning toward the sound of her voice, though she had not yet spoken. A hush seemed to ripple through the edges of the hall. The aliens paused for a moment, some tilting their heads as if confused by the intrusion of this fragile, human child into their arena. The girl walked slowly toward the platform, her hands folded in front of her, her face calm yet filled with determination. The horse sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, and his muscles twitched, a shiver running down his spine. The soft hum of the auction hall seemed to dim around her presence, as if the world itself had noticed this small human who dared to approach, a creature dismissed by all others. She reached out, one hand trembling slightly, her fingers brushing the air near his nose. He snorted softly, stepping closer. The moment felt delicate, fragile, like a thin thread stretched across a vast chasm, yet it held weight more powerful than the whispers and scorn of the aliens. The horse lowered his head gently, allowing her to touch his muzzle. The girl smiled, a small sound that seemed to echo in the hall. She whispered words he did not understand yet. They carried music, kindness, and a promise he could feel coursing through his veins. A spark ignited, a memory long buried, a flicker of hope that perhaps he was not yet finished. The aliens leaned back again, murmuring among themselves, their clicks and tones carrying curiosity and suspicion. A few of the younger aliens tilted their heads as if sensing something beyond their calculations. The horse pressed closer to the girl, his trembling, lessening muscles unclenching, his tail swishing lightly against the platform. The girl crouched slightly, whispering again, her hands moving along the side of his neck, brushing dust and old dried blood from his coat. The warmth of her fingers spread through him, a sensation he had not known in years of battle and neglect. The auctioneer floated above, waving his hands, producing new holograms and data, but the girl ignored them. Her eyes fixed on his, she spoke again, and he neighed softly, a sound of tentative trust building brick by brick in the hollowed ruins of his spirit. The air seemed to hum between them, the platform no longer a stage of judgment but a place of connection. The feeble warhorse felt something awaken deep inside, a courage long buried, a strength waiting for someone to see it, a pulse of life that had been hidden under layers of doubt and scorn. And the girl laughed softly, a sound like wind through reeds, light and bright, and he took a A step forward, a step of faith into a future he could not yet see but felt rising. Like the first light of dawn in the darkness of the hall, the girl straightened slowly, her hand resting on the horse's mane, her eyes never leaving his. The auctioneer hovered above his metallic robe, shimmering with light flickering across the floating hall. He raised his arms, signaling for bids to continue, but the humans in the hall were few and small, and none moved forward. The aliens whispered among themselves, their clicks and hums like sharp knives through the thick air. The feeble warhorse shifted uneasily, sensing the tension building around him. He pawed lightly at the platform, his breath coming in small clouds as the girl reached into her pouch and drew out her coins, small worn pieces that gleamed faintly in the floating light. She held them out, her fingers steady, her eyes determined. The auctioneer arched an eyebrow. The crowd of aliens murmured low and confused, their calculations interrupted by the audacity of this human child, offering her meager coins for a creature they had deemed worthless. The girl spoke softly, words no one else could hear, and the horse tilted his head, listening as if he understood every syllable. The auctioneer hesitated, hovering above the platform, his hands wavering for a moment as the glow of her coins reflected in the holograms floating around them. One of the larger aliens leaned forward, its triangular eyes narrowing, its limbs bending in sharp angles, a whisper issuing from it like a blade across the hall. It questioned the logic of the purchase. The girl ignored them, her focus absolute, her fingers brushing against the horse's neck, reassurance flowing between them. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, some clicking in disbelief, some humming tones of amusement, others with curiosity tinged with annoyance. The horse snorted softly, stepping closer, pressing his head against her chest. The auctioneer raised one arm and then another, signaling for the bid to be accepted. The whole seemed to hold its breath as the final decision hung suspended in the glowing light. The girl nodded once, placing her coins on the platform. The metallic sound echoed in the cavernous space, a small, solid sound in the midst of alien whispers. The auctioneer's eyes widened slightly, a ripple of surprise passing through the crowd. The holograms pulsed, indicating ownership transferring, and the aliens leaned back, some blinking rapidly, some muttering calculations that could not reconcile human courage with their cold logic. The horse whinnied softly, stepping fully into her space's body, relaxing muscles, loosening, a small tremor running through him. But it was different. Now it was anticipation, not fear. The girl hugged his neck, a small laugh escaping her lips, a sound so full of warmth that the floating lights seemed to shimmer brighter around them. The aliens continued to whisper, but their words no longer held the weight they once did. The hall seemed smaller, somehow less intimidating, as if her determination had carved a bubble around the horse, protecting him from judgment. He pressed his head into her shoulder, allowing the connection to solidify, and for the first time in years he felt chosen, valued, and seen. The auctioneer waved his hands, dismissing the remaining bids, and the floating hall erupted in a mixture of clicks, hums, and astonishment as the human girl led the feeble warhorse off the platform. Each step a small victory, each glance a promise that this was only the beginning of a bond that would grow and change everything. The girl led the warhorse off the floating platform, her hand resting lightly on his mane, his hooves clattering against the metallic walkways, sending tiny sparks into the glowing air below. The alien crowd whispered and clicked behind them, their voices fading as they moved toward the exit. The world outside the hall opened up into a vast landscape of jagged cliffs and rolling plains bathed in the light of twin suns. The wind carried the smell of strange minerals and scorched soil, and the horse shivered at the new scents and the vast emptiness stretching before him. The girl spoke softly, her voice a steady anchor in the unfamiliar space, and he bent his head slightly, listening as if drawing strength from her words. They moved down a path carved between glowing rock formations, the colors shifting from violet to gold to deep crimson with every step. The horse stumbled once against a loose stone. The girl reached out immediately, steadying him, her fingers brushing against his side, and he shook his head as if shaking off doubt and fear. Each step forward was a test of trust and courage. He felt the burn in his muscles, remembering the strength that lay hidden beneath scars and exhaustion. The girl hummed a tune she had made up softly, and the sound floated over the plains like a thread pulling him forward. The alien cities in the distance gleamed like shards of glass and metal, their towers twisting impossibly into the sky. The horse glanced at them nervously, but she squeezed his neck gently, whispering, and he relaxed, feeling her confidence flow into him. The ground changed. Beneath them, from cracked stone to soft glowing sands that lit up with every hoofbeat, the colors danced under his hooves, and for a moment he forgot the rejection, the laughter, the scorn, and felt only the rhythm of movement and the warmth of her presence. The wind picked up, carrying a hint of ozone and the distant roar of unseen creatures. He stiffened his legs, ready to bolt. Bashi leaned against him, murmuring encouragement, and he slowed, listening, trusting her entirely. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the plains, twisting and shimmering. The girl laughed lightly as he neighed softly, matching her tone in a way that made them feel less alone. In the vast alien wilderness, the stars began to prick the sky with light, and the air cooled, carrying scents of distant forests and strange flora. The horse lifted his head toward the sky, nostrils flaring, taking in the unfamiliar world that was now his world too. Every step forward felt like a step toward rebirth. His muscles awakening, his spirit stirring beneath the layers of fear and neglect. The girl spoke again, words he did not understand, but he felt them, in the steady beat of her heart and the gentle pressure of her hands, guiding him forward. The path wound on over hills and valleys, glowing softly in the twilight, the wind carrying echoes of alien birds and distant waterfalls. He stumbled again, and she caught him, steadying him, murmuring softly, and he pressed closer, feeling for the first time in years that he was not alone, that someone believed in him, that someone saw strength and potential even in a body the aliens had dismissed. And together they moved onward into the growing night, the plains stretching endlessly before them, and the bond between human and horse deepening with every step. The twin moons rose slowly above the horizon, casting pale, silver light across the alien plains. The horse lowered his head, grazing the strange glowing grasses, his hooves sinking slightly into the soft earth. The girl knelt beside him, her hands moving gently over his coat, brushing away dust and dirt that clung from the long journey. She hummed softly, a tune that rose and fell with the wind, and he pressed his head against her shoulder, trembling slightly as if learning for the first time that touch could heal. She spoke words in her own language, soothing words, full of warmth and promise, and he tilted his head, listening, each breath drawing him closer to calm. The night around them was alive with faint whispers of creatures, unseen glowing insects that hovered like tiny stars above the grasses, and the hum of distant waterfalls carried through the valleys. He pawed the ground softly, shifting closer to her body, his muscles relaxing under her careful hands. The girl fetched water from a nearby stream, dipping her hands in the cool liquid and letting it trickle over his muzzle. He drank eagerly, and she laughed softly, a sound like wind over crystal peaks. The air cooled as shadows lengthened, and he shivered. She draped a small blanket over his back, resting lightly on his shoulders, and he leaned into her weight, finding comfort in her closeness. The stars above glittered in unfamiliar constellations, and he lifted his head, sniffing the night sky, feeling a sense of wonder he had never known. In the sterile halls of the oxen, the girl told stories as she worked her hands along his sides, tales of mountains and oceans, of sunrises and storms, her voice painting pictures he could see only in his mind but felt vividly in his heart, each story a thread weaving trust between them. The glow of the moons cast long shadows over his form, and he flicked his ears, listening to her voice, feeling the warmth of connection. He had never known the wind carried scents of distant flora, and he sniffed deeply, inhaling the strange mixture of life and growth. The girl rested her cheek against his neck, whispering softly that he was strong, that he was brave, that he could be more than what the aliens had said. He pressed closer, her hands gentle but firm over wounds old and new, and he trembled, not in fear but in relief that someone cared enough to see him fully. She hummed again, and he sighed softly, responding as if joining her melody, creating a harmony that drifted across the plains. The night grew deeper, stars multiplying until the sky seemed full of glittering eyes. He felt the pulse of her heart beneath his cheek, and he pressed into it, a steady rhythm, like a drum calling him back to life. Every muscle in his body loosening tension, fading old fears, falling away under her touch. He lowered himself to the ground, letting her continue her care, brushing off dust, cleaning small cuts, murmuring encouragement and praise. The twin moons shone down upon them, the plains alive with nocturnal sounds, and he drifted into a strange, new peace, a sense of belonging that he had never known under the eyes of those who had mocked him. And for the first time, he allowed himself to hope that this was only the beginning, that the bond with the human girl would awaken something greater, something unstoppable, something that would change both of their fates forever. The days passed slowly under the twin suns, and the horse began to move with a confidence he had not known in years, his muscles rippling under his coat, each step surer than the last. The girl rode beside him, her hands steady on the reins, her voice calm and encouraging as they traveled across rolling plains and jagged hills. The wind whipped through his mane, carrying scents of distant forests and alien flowers, and he lifted his head high, inhaling deeply, savoring the freedom and warmth of the sun on his back. The girl laughed softly when he bucked and danced in a sudden burst of energy, and he neighed in response, a sound strong and clear, ringing across the empty valleys as if announcing his return to life. The scars along his flanks no longer seemed to weigh him down, the small cuts from the journey tingling slightly with new blood flowing and the old wounds stiffening with strength. He shifted his weight lightly and the girl murmured encouragement, brushing her hands along his neck, teaching him to trust her touch, to trust her guidance. The horizons stretched endlessly before them, mountains twisting impossibly in the distance, rivers glowing faintly under the alien sun, and he lifted his legs higher than before, stepping over rocks and fallen trees with grace he had forgotten. He possessed each movement filled with power. He felt it coursing through his limbs. The girl pointed to a fallen tree blocking their path, and he hesitated briefly, then leaped over it, his hoofs pounding the soft ground, landing firmly, and she cheered softly, a sound like music that made his chest swell with pride and possibility. Every gallop, every stride carried the echo of his past failures, transforming them into strength and determination. The wind carried her words, encouragement and praise over him, wrapping around his body like a cloak of fire, and he pressed into it, feeling the pulse of her confidence surging through him. He felt lighter, faster, stronger, as if every moment with her awakened something hidden deep within him. The nights were calm under the twin moons, their glow reflecting off his sleekening coat, and he rested lightly beside her, murmuring softly as she stroked his mane, and he felt her steady heartbeat and the rhythm of her breathing sinking into him, calming him, grounding him. He explored small trails and hidden valleys, each new discovery a test of courage and intelligence, and each time he succeeded he felt a spark of pride igniting inside him. His eyes brighter, ears pricked forward, tails swishing confidently as he navigated rocks, rivers, and steep hills without hesitation. The girl hummed a soft tune as they walked. She spoke words of encouragement, brushing dust from his sides, and he softly responding as if promising to rise to her expectations. Each challenge a bricklaying foundation for something greater. He had been weak, he had been rejected, he had been dismissed, but under her gaze, under her care, he was awakening to the power and courage that had always lived inside him, and every step forward, every muscle flexed, and every breath drawn felt like a step closer to the warrior. He was meant to become the bond between human and horse, deepened every day, a tether of trust and strength that could not be broken, and he realized slowly that together they could face anything the world could throw at them, and he pressed closer into her touch, feeling the pulse of his own newfound strength rising within him like a tide ready to crash and reshape his life forever. The horizon darkened with the shadows of creatures that moved with silent menace across the plains. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and something foul. The horse stiffened his muscles, taut his ears flicking to the distant sounds of claws scraping against stone, and the girl leaned forward, her hands steady on his mane, her eyes scanning the shapes in the distance, and he neighed softly, warning her of the danger. She whispered encouragement, murmuring soothing words to keep him calm yet alert. The creatures emerged from the valleys, their forms twisted and jagged, their eyes glowing faintly like embers in the dusk. They prowled closer, moving with a terrifying precision. The horse poured the ground, shifting weight from hoof to hoof, his nostrils flaring. He could feel adrenaline surging through him, a river of heat and power he had not known since before the oxen. The girl murmured again, her hand resting lightly on his neck, reassuring him that she was with him, and he pressed his head against her shoulder, drawing courage from her presence. They moved forward slowly, navigating the uneven terrain, rocks and glowing plants, scratching their legs as they passed, but the creatures advanced with speed. The horse shifted into a gallop, his muscles rippling under the alien suns, his hooves pounding the ground, sending vibrations through the plains. The girl leaned forward, gripping his mane, her breath steady as he surged ahead, closing the distance between them in safety. The creatures lunged, claws snapping at his flank, but he twisted mid-stride, narrowly avoiding them. Her hands guided him over fallen boulders and streams of glowing water. He leapt high, heart pounding, feeling strength he had never claimed before, and landed solidly, feeling the power of every muscle working in harmony with her voice, her guidance. Every step, a precise movement, a dance of trust between them. One creature lashed out, its shadow falling over them, but he reared and kicked, sending it sprawling into the rocks behind them. The girl clung lightly, murmuring praise, and he eyed triumphantly, charging forward, their momentum unstoppable. The wind whipped through his mane, carrying the scent of fear and excitement. Together they pressed onward. The creatures faltered a moment as if startled by their coordination and determination. The horse twisted and dodged, narrowly avoiding a snapping jaw brushing against his flank. The girl guided him with gentle, firm hands, her voice steady and calm, and he responded instinctively, trusting her entirely. A sudden leap over a deep chasm left them momentarily suspended in the air. The horse landed perfectly steady. She let out a breathless laugh, and he neighed, loudly shaking his head, as if celebrating the victory they had earned together. The plains stretched before them, open and empty now, with the threat behind them, but the pulse of adrenaline lingered, every muscle humming with power, every hoofbeat a declaration of courage. The girl leaned against him, murmuring softly as they slowed, walking side by side. The horse pressed against her, feeling the surge of bravery and strength within himself. He had faced fear and danger and emerged alive. He had acted not just for himself but for her, and the bond between human and horse had been sealed in fire and shadow, stronger, unbreakable, a promise that together they could face anything the universe sent. And he neighed softly again, the sound ringing across the plains, carrying a challenge to all who would dare underestimate them in the days to come. He would grow even stronger, but this moment would remain the first proof that he was no longer the feeble warhorse dismissed by aliens, but a warrior reborn, under the guidance of the girl who had believed in him. The plains stretched endlessly beneath the twin suns, now high and bright. The horse galloped with a strength and confidence he had never known, every muscle rippling with power, his hooves striking the ground with thunderous rhythm, and the girl leaned forward, guiding him with steady hands, her eyes shining with pride and joy. He neighed loudly, a sound of triumph echoing across the valleys, and the distant mountains seemed to tremble at the force of it. He twisted and leaped over rock, streams, and fallen trees, moving with grace and precision. The wind whipped through his mane, carrying the scent of freedom and the taste of victory across the alien plains. The girl laughed brightly, her voice full of life, and he responded, pressing closer into her touch, feeling the pulse of her heartbeat and the rhythm of her breath synchronizing with his own, each stride a testament to trust and courage. He had been feeble once, dismissed, mocked, and ignored, but now he ran not just for survival but for triumph, for the bond that had awakened strength within him that the aliens had never seen, that the universe had never believed possible. Together they raced across the glowing fields of alien flowers, the petals brushing against his flanks, shimmering in the sunlight, and the air was alive with movement, birds of strange forms flying in spirals. Above them, creatures of the plains pausing to watch the display of power and unity. The girl spoke softly, guiding him toward hidden trails, through forests of towering crystalline trees. He listened intently, every word shaping his path, every gesture strengthening the connection between them. The stars began to prick the sky as the twin moons rose, casting pale silver light over the transformed the landscape, and he moved with purpose, no longer hesitant or trembling, his eyes bright and alert, reflecting the moons above, his mane flowing behind him like a banner of victory. The distant cities glittered in the nightlight, and rumors of their journey began to spread across galaxies, whispers of the human girl and the once feeble warhorse who had faced danger, survived trials, and grown into a creature of unmatched courage and power. Together they crossed rivers glowing with bioluminescent light and climbed hills that twisted impossibly toward the sky, each obstacle a chance to prove strength and trust, each victory binding them closer. The girl rested her cheek against his neck, murmuring praise, and he neighed softly, a deep, resonant sound that carried across the plains like a herald announcing a new legend. The horse lifted his head high, surveying the horizon, the twin moons reflecting in his eyes, the wind carrying the stories of their deeds to every corner of the universe. The once feeble creature now stood proud and mighty, muscles taut and gleaming. He had become more than anyone could imagine. A warrior, a companion, a legend. The girl hugged his neck tightly, laughing, tears of joy running down her cheeks, and he pressed against her, letting the warmth of her hands and heart fill him with certainty that together they had changed fate forever. Their story spreading across planets and stars, a tale whispered in awe by aliens and humans alike, of courage reborn, strength discovered, and a bond unbroken, a reminder that even the weakest could rise under faith and love. that even the creatures dismissed and scorned could transform into something extraordinary and across the glowing plains. Beneath the twin moons the horse galloped freely, the girl guiding him with laughter and love beside him, and they became a legend written in motion and light, a tale of triumph that would echo across the galaxies for eternity.